The air in the executive boardroom was so cold it felt like it could freeze the sweat on the back of my neck. I sat perfectly still in my leather chair, looking across the long mahogany table. At the head of the table sat Richard Vance, the newly appointed CEO of the company. He was flanked by the HR director and the head of corporate legal. They looked exactly like a firing squad. Vance leaned forward, resting his manicured hands on the polished wood. He had that smug, untouchable smile that only comes when you think you hold all the cards. He slid a thick stack of papers across the table. It stopped right in front of me. "Elias," Vance said, his voice smooth and completely devoid of empathy. "We are making some strategic realignments. Your position as VP of Advanced Engineering is being eliminated. We are letting you go, effective immediately." I didn't blink. I just looked at the papers. Vance chuckled softly, clearly expecting me to yell, beg, or cause a scene. He wanted a reaction. He wanted to feel powerful in this moment. "Of course, there is a severance package," he added, tapping the top page. "Standard corporate policy. But there is one more thing we need to clear up today." He leaned in a little closer, his eyes gleaming with pure greed. "The company will be taking full ownership of the aerocell patent, effective immediately. We need to clean up the corporate structure for the upcoming multi-billion-dollar IPO. Your name will be removed from the primary inventor list. It's just business, Elias." The room went dead silent. The HR director looked down at her clipboard. The lawyer stopped tapping his pen. They all waited for me to explode. They expected the tired, overworked engineer to scream about fairness. They expected me to threaten to sue them right then and there. Instead, I took a slow, deep breath. I reached into my leather briefcase, sitting on the floor beside my chair. I pulled out a single, folded piece of paper. I placed it on the table, right next to his severance agreement. I uncapped my pen, signed my name at the bottom of my document, and stood up. I didn't say a single word. I just looked Vance dead in the eye, turned around, and walked out of the glass boardroom. I could feel their eyes burning into my back as I walked down the long, quiet hallway. I didn't look back. I kept my pace steady, calm, and completely controlled. I walked past the engineering labs, past the break room, and out the front doors into the bright afternoon sun. It wasn't until I was sitting in the driver's seat of my car, with the doors locked and the engine off, that I finally let out a long breath. My name is Elias Thorne. I am 42 years old, and until about 10 minutes ago, I was the VP of Advanced Engineering. I am the man who built the core technology that is about to take this company public. Richard Vance thinks he just fired a subordinate. He thinks he just stole a $690 million asset. He thinks he won. He has absolutely no idea that he just triggered a dormant legal bomb. And by the time it goes off, it is going to take his entire career down with it. Sitting in the quiet of my car, the emotional reality of the betrayal finally started to hit me. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. I had spent the last 4 years of my life building the aerocell solid-state battery system. This wasn't just another corporate project. It was a revolutionary piece of technology. It was a battery that could charge in minutes, hold a massive amount of power, and never catch fire. It was valued at $690 million in projected defense and commercial contracts. It was the absolute crown jewel of the entire company. And Richard Vance wanted to steal it. I knew exactly who Vance was. He was a finance guy. He didn't understand the technology, and he didn't care about the science. All he cared about was the glory and the financial reward of the upcoming IPO. He looked at spreadsheets, not schematics. His plan was incredibly simple and incredibly cruel. He was going to push me out, claim my life's work as standard work for hire, and cut me out of the $40 million inventor bonus and equity triggers that were tied to my name. I thought about everything he was taking from me. He wasn't just taking my job. He was taking my reputation. He was taking my financial future. He was taking the public recognition for the engineering breakthrough I had bled for. He was going to stand on a stage, ring the opening bell, and accept all the credit for my hard work. But then, the heavy feeling in my chest started to fade. It was replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I reached into the inside pocket of my suit jacket. I pulled out the document I had just signed in the boardroom. I unfolded it and smoothed it out on my lap. It was not a resignation letter. It was not a standard intellectual property assignment. It It was a formal, notarized notice of IP reversion. This was the first major flaw in Vance's master plan. His legal team was lazy. They only looked at the standard 10-page corporate employment contract that every new hire signed. They completely ignored the 3-page negotiated addendum I had signed when I was recruited 4 years ago. When I was hired, the company was desperate. They couldn't find a lead engineer who could solve the battery overheating issue. I had the leverage, and I used it. I made sure that specific addendum was locked into my contract. The people listening to this need to understand something very important. The theft was real. Vance really did try to steal my life's work. But he made a fatal mistake. He assumed I was just another employee who didn't read the fine print. I had a hidden shield, and as I looked at the notarized stamp at the bottom of the page, I knew exactly how I was going to use it to stop a massive corporate machine in its tracks. I drove home in total silence. When I walked into my home office, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I just sat down at my heavy wooden desk and laid out the exact mechanics of my protection. I like to call it the ghost in the contract. Let me take you back 4 years. When I was recruited for this job, the company was in deep trouble. They were burning through millions of dollars, and their battery technology kept failing in testing. They desperately needed a lead engineer who could fix the core thermal issues. I was that engineer. Because they were desperate, I had leverage, and I used it. During the hiring process, their corporate lawyers sent over the standard employment contract. It had all the usual clauses. It said that anything I invented while working for them belonged to the company. That is standard practice. But I crossed out that specific section with a red pen. I attached a 3-page addendum. I called it the pre-existing IP and independent development clause. Here is the secret they didn't know. I had actually solved the core aerocell battery problem on my own time. I did it a full year before I ever officially joined the company. I didn't use their labs. I didn't use their computers. I didn't use their money. I had the original hard drives, the notarized timestamps, and the raw code logs sitting in a fireproof box in my closet to prove it. The addendum I signed stated this very clearly. It said that this specific battery technology remained my personal property. The company would only receive an exclusive license to use it while I was employed there. But I didn't stop there. I am an engineer, but I also know how corporate people think. I knew that if the company ever went public, they would try to claim my work to boost their valuation. So, I added a poison pill to the contract. The clause stated that if the company terminated me without cause before the patent generated $50 million in revenue, the exclusive license would automatically be canceled. The rights would instantly revert to me. It would become full, unencumbered personal ownership. Vance's legal team completely missed this. Why? Because they are arrogant and lazy. They relied on the standard 10-page corporate template. They assumed all engineering work done by a VP was automatically company property. They didn't even read the addendum I attached. They just filed it away in a digital cabinet, assuming it was just standard boilerplate. To make sure my position was bulletproof, I filed the initial provisional patent in my own name, not the company's name. I paid the legal fees out of my own pocket. When I sat in my home office looking at these documents, the reality of the situation was crystal clear. The audience listening to this needs to understand the shift that just happened. I was no longer a victim of a corporate theft. I was the rightful owner of the asset. Richard Vance thought he was taking my life's work. He thought he was stealing a $690 million patent. But the truth was much simpler. The company never actually owned the patent. They were just renting it from me. And by firing me without cause today, I had just canceled their lease. I did not just sit in my home office and wait for the company to realize their mistake. I am an engineer. I solve problems. And right now, I had a massive problem to solve. I needed to actively build a trap. The very next morning, I contacted my personal lawyer. His name is Marcus. He is a ruthless intellectual property litigator who has spent his entire career taking down massive corporations that try to bully independent inventors. I sent him the addendum, the hard drives, and the timestamps. When he saw the documents, he actually laughed out loud on the phone. He told me the corporate lawyers had handed me a loaded gun. We spent the next 48 hours in my home office, drinking cold coffee and drafting a federal injunction. We gathered every single piece of evidence. We organized the notarized timestamps. We backed up the original hard drives to a secure cloud server. We even pulled old email chains from my personal archives that proved the company's top executives knew about the addendum when I signed it. But drafting a lawsuit was not the real weapon. Suing the company in a private court battle would take years. They would bury me in paperwork, delay the hearings, and drain my legal fees. I needed a faster way to hurt them. I needed to target their money. This is where the real one legal move comes into play. I knew the company was preparing for a massive initial public offering. An IPO is when a private company sells its stock to the public for the first time. To do this, they need an underwriting bank. The bank handles the money, sets the stock price, and guarantees the sale to the public. For this company, the lead underwriting bank was a massive global financial institution. These banks are incredibly strict. They do not take risks. I found the direct contact information for the bank's legal compliance department. I didn't call them. I didn't yell at them or make a scene. I drafted a polite, highly formal document. It was called a Notice of Encumbrance. I attached my federal injunction, the notarized proof of my ownership, and the specific contract addendum. I explained, in very simple legal terms, that the core $690 million asset of their upcoming IPO was currently subject to an active federal ownership dispute. This was the kill shot. Let me explain how corporate finance works, so you understand why this was so devastating. When a bank underwrites an IPO, they have to guarantee to their investors that the company actually owns what it says it owns. If a bank receives a formal legal notice that the company's most valuable patent is disputed, the bank is legally required to halt the entire process. They cannot price the stock. They cannot take the company public until the ownership title is 100% cleared. If the patent is not completely clear, the IPO dies. And if the IPO dies, the company's valuation crashes, the executives lose their massive bonuses, and the CEO gets fired. I was loading the weapon in total silence. Richard Vance was probably sitting in his new corner office right now, celebrating his stolen patent. He had no idea that I was aiming directly at his financial lifeblood. On the morning of the third day, I opened my email client. I attached the Notice of Encumbrance. I typed in the email address for the lead compliance officer at the underwriting bank. I took a deep breath. I thought about the arrogance in Vance's voice when he told me it was just business. I thought about the 4 years of my life he was trying to erase. I clicked send. The email disappeared into the digital ether. The weapon was armed. The trap was set. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. The clock was now ticking on Richard Vance's career, and there was absolutely nothing he could do to stop it. Asterisk, asterisk, section 5. The arrogance of the blind, asterisk, asterisk. Target word count, 750. 2 weeks passed. The trap was fully set, and the villain was walking right into it with his eyes wide open. Richard Vance decided to hold a massive, highly publicized press conference to announce the company's upcoming IPO. He rented out a large hotel ballroom downtown. There were cameras, reporters, and a giant screen displaying the new aerosol battery. Vance stood on the stage, looking incredibly smug. He announced to the world that the aerosol patent was fully secured and the IPO was launching the very next week. He publicly praised his brilliant engineering team for their hard work, but he deliberately omitted my name. Not a single mention of Elias Thorne. He made it sound like the technology just magically appeared out of thin air. Later that same day, he went on a popular finance podcast. The host asked him about the recent leadership changes and my sudden departure. Vance didn't even hesitate. He leaned into the microphone and called me a disgruntled former employee who just couldn't handle the pace of innovation. He told the listeners that I was bitter about being fired and that I had no real understanding of the technology one was supposedly building. Back at the office, Vance was tightening his grip. He wanted to make sure there were no loose ends. He called the remaining engineering team into a conference room. He pushed a stack of new, retroactive intellectual property assignment documents across the table. He told them it was just a routine update to clean up the chain of title for the IPO. The engineers were confused. They knew I had built the core architecture. They knew I was the one who solved the thermal issues. But Vance was the CEO, and they were just employees. They signed the documents. Vance felt completely untouchable. He was so confident in his stolen victory that his legal team actually sent me a formal cease and desist letter. It arrived by certified mail on a Tuesday afternoon. I opened the thick envelope and read the legal jargon. They were demanding that I immediately stop spreading malicious rumors about the patent ownership. They threatened me with a massive lawsuit if I didn't sign a final, binding non-disclosure agreement. I sat at my kitchen table and just laughed out loud. Vance had no idea what he had just done. By holding that press conference, he had lied on the record to the public and the press. By going on that podcast, he had made false statements about the company's core asset. And by forcing his engineers to sign those retroactive documents, he had created a paper trail of fraud. He was preparing to take a company public based on a patent he did not own. In the corporate world, that isn't just a breach of contract. That is securities fraud. His arrogance had just created a massive, documented record of his own destruction. He wasn't just losing the battle. He was actively digging his own grave, and he was using a very expensive, corporate-branded shovel to do it. The morning of the IPO pricing meeting arrived. This was the day everything was supposed to happen. Vance was sitting in the main glass boardroom on the top floor. He was surrounded by the lead investment bankers from the underwriting firm. They were there to set the final stock price and prepare to ring the opening bell. But the atmosphere in the room was incredibly toxic. The air felt heavy. The lead banker, a sharp, older man in a tailored suit, was not smiling. He was looking over a thick file of legal documents. He stopped flipping the pages, took off his glasses, and slid a single piece of paper across the polished table. It was the notice of encumbrance I had sent 2 weeks earlier. The banker looked up at Vance. His voice was cold and completely professional. He asked Vance directly about the active federal dispute regarding the aerosol patent. He asked why the company had not disclosed an active ownership claim on their primary asset. Vance actually laughed. He leaned back in his chair, using the exact same arrogant lines he had used on the podcast. He told the banker it was a frivolous claim from a fired, disgruntled guy. He said it was completely baseless and that his legal team was handling it. The banker did not laugh. He didn't even blink. He leaned forward and stated clearly that if the intellectual property was not 100% clear, they could not price the stock. He told Vance that the IPO was canceled until the title was cleared. Vance's smug smile completely vanished. His face turned pale. He aggressively grabbed his phone and called his general counsel into the room. The GC walked in, looking annoyed, until the banker handed him the notice. The GC took one look at the document, and all the color drained from his face. He started stammering. He admitted, in a quiet, shaking voice, that they might have missed my 2019 addendum. Panic set in. The room descended into absolute chaos. Bankers were shouting into their phones. The GC was frantically flipping through his binder. Vance grabbed his cell phone and started dialing my personal number. He was trying to call me to offer a settlement. He was trying to buy his way out of the disaster. My phone was sitting on the passenger seat of my car. It was ringing. I looked at the screen, saw his name, and let it go to voicemail. I wasn't going to answer. I was already inside the executive building. I was standing in the elevator, watching the floor numbers tick upward. The walls were closing in, and there was absolutely no escape. Section 7. The boardroom reversal. Target word count, 850. The elevator doors chimed and slid open on the executive floor. I stepped out into the quiet hallway. I was not alone. Flanking me on my left was Marcus, my ruthless intellectual property lawyer, carrying a thick leather briefcase. On my right was a federal process server holding a stack of official legal documents. We walked down the long, carpeted hallway in total silence. Our footsteps were the only sound. The air felt heavy, like the moments right before a thunderstorm breaks. We bypassed Vance's corner office completely. I didn't even glance at the door. I walked straight to the heavy glass doors of the main boardroom and pushed them open. The room was full of panicked, chaotic energy. Junior investment bankers were typing furiously on their laptops. The general counsel was sweating through his expensive shirt, frantically flipping through his binder. Richard Vance was standing at the head of the table, looking like a man watching his entire life burn down. On the massive wall screen, the board of directors were staring in via video call, their faces frozen in absolute shock. When the glass doors opened, everyone stopped and looked at me. The typing stopped. The whispering stopped. I walked calmly to the center of the room. I didn't look at Vance. I looked directly at the lead banker. I nodded to Marcus. He stepped forward, opened his briefcase, and slid the federal injunction and my notarized proof of ownership across the polished mahogany table. "Good morning," I said. My voice was steady, calm, and filled the quiet room. "My name is Elias Thorne. I am the legal owner of the Arrow cell patent. You're currently preparing to take this company public based on a fraudulent premise. The company does not own this technology. They never did." Vance finally found his voice. He completely exploded. He slammed his hands on the table and pointed a shaking, red finger at me. "Security!" he screamed, spit flying from his lips. "Get security in here right now. This man is a thief. He is a disgruntled employee trying to extort this company. Get him out of my building." He expected the bankers to agree with him. He expected them to call the guards and throw me out. Instead, the lead banker stood up. He slammed his own hand on the table. The loud crack echoed like a gunshot in the glass room. "Shut up and sit down, Richard," the banker roared. Vance froze. His mouth hung open. He slowly sank back into his leather chair, completely stunned into silence. The lead banker turned to me. His demeanor changed instantly. He was no longer dealing with a panicked CEO. He was dealing with the man who held his money. "Mr. Thorne," the banker said smoothly, "are you willing to license this technology to save the IPO?" "Yes," I said, "but the terms have changed. The price is no longer a standard corporate licensing rate. I want a $690 million outright purchase, payable via wire transfer immediately. If you do not agree, this IPO dies today, and tomorrow morning, I will sell the patent to your biggest competitor." Vance stood up again, desperate and pathetic. "We don't have that kind of liquid cash," he screamed. "The money is for the public offering. You can't do this." Before I could answer, the chairman of the board spoke from the video screen. His voice was cold and unforgiving. "Richard, sit down. Mr. Thorne, we will authorize the wire transfer. But Richard, if you do not sign the authorization right now, we will sue you personally for the billions we just lost. We will take your house, your accounts, and your pension." Vance looked at the screen. He looked at the bankers. He looked at me. The fight completely left his body. His shoulders slumped. He collapsed into his chair, defeated, broken, and entirely powerless. The aftermath was swift, clean, and completely devastating. Within 2 hours, the massive wire transfer hit my personal account. I officially sold the patent to the company for $690 million. But before I signed the final transfer documents, I attached one final, non-negotiable condition to the contract. Richard Vance had to be fired for cause. Specifically, he was being terminated for making fraudulent statements to the Securities and Exchange Commission during the IPO process. The board agreed immediately. They were terrified of their own legal liability, and they desperately needed a scapegoat to save themselves from shareholder lawsuits. Vance didn't even fight it. He just signed the termination papers with a shaking hand, his eyes fixed on the floor. I walked out of the boardroom and took the private elevator down to the main lobby. The marble floors were shining under the bright lights. The security guard at the front desk were standing at attention, completely unaware of the corporate war that had just ended upstairs. I stood near the heavy glass doors, waiting in total silence. A few minutes later, the elevator doors chimed and slowly opened. Richard Vance walked out. He was carrying a small, cardboard box of his personal items. Flanking him on both sides were the exact same HR guards he had used to fire me just 3 weeks ago. He looked completely hollow. He looked broken. He looked like a man who had been entirely erased from the only world he ever cared about. His expensive tailored suit looked wrinkled and defeated. His eyes were red, sunken, and empty. The arrogant, untouchable CEO who had smiled at me in the boardroom was gone. In his place was just a man who had lost everything because he thought he was smarter than the room. As he walked past me toward the exit, he slowed his pace. He turned his head and tried to make eye contact with me. He was looking for a reaction. He was looking for me to gloat, to smile, or to say something cruel to rub salt in the wound. I didn't give him anything. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just turned my back and walked out the front doors into the bright afternoon sun. I did not say a single word. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away. As I drove, I thought about the immense value of patience. I thought about the quiet power of meticulous documentation. I thought about the absolute importance of knowing your exact worth in a room full of people who want to take it from you. The company got to keep their IPO. The engineers got to keep their jobs. But I had the capital to start my own firm on my own terms with total control. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and looked at the banking notification on the screen. The smartest move I ever made wasn't building the battery. It was simply reading the contract they thought I was too stupid to understand.